So about a week ago, I came out and made a video all around the reasons why I've enjoyed using my Olympus E-M1 Mark II for the last 12 months. Now, if you've not seen that video, I will leave a card for it at the end of this one for you to check out yourselves. But in today's video, I wanted to come out and make a start on a series of videos that I've been planning on doing for a while, and that is highlighting some of the key features of this camera. So today we're going to start with live composite. So let me show you this image that I've got set up, and I'll show you how it works. And we'll take a walk down Spain Point and take a bunch of photos using live composite to take some really long exposures with very little ND filter in some quite bright conditions. So let's have a look. So before we get too into this video, let me start with a quick introduction to live composite, and I'll show you how it works on the camera. So you can see I have an ND filter on the front of the camera. It's a 10-stop filter, an f4.5. This is allowing me to get a 1.3 second exposure time, and that is quite key. The exposure times are key to this because when you go into live composite, on this camera there are only set times, so you need to try and get a sort of exposure value that is going to give you one of the preset values that they have chosen for your shutter speed. So let me show you the back of the camera and I'll show you how it's going to work. So this is the back of my Olympus E-M1 Mark II. Now you can see with the 10-stop filter on at base ISO, which is ISO 200, f4.5 is giving me a 1.3 second exposure time. So if I scroll the shutter speed all the way past 60 seconds and live bulb and live time, that will give us live comp. There we go. So you can see that the metering needle is right down the middle, so that's telling us that this is exposed. Now if I go into the menu, this should bring up the composite settings menu. Now you can see the shutter speed here is 1/1.3 seconds. But you have some other settings available as well. So this is why it's very, very important to get your shutter speed where it needs to be to match up with one of these settings. So now I'm going to press shoot, and that is going to take a base photograph. Now if I press it again, this will start taking a series of images and it will overlay them on top of the original composite, only adding in the highlights, which you can see on the video are the waves crashing around and the waves are moving. But I can leave this going for an indefinite amount of time and it will take a really, really long exposure photograph despite the conditions that we have and the ND filter that I'm using. So I've had this image exposing now for almost 5 minutes and it's taken a little over 215 photographs, which is something that you wouldn't be able to do with these lighting conditions at that sort of aperture with this filter on normally. So I'm going to let this run to about 5 minutes and let's just see what sort of photograph we get. Nearly there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and to stop it you just press the shutter button once again. So another reason why you might want to consider using this live comp mode is if you're doing something like I'm doing now, you've come to the coast, but the tide just isn't quite where you want it to be just yet, but it's very, very close. So I've set up a composition photographing these posts, and there is just a little bit of the beach left visible in the bottom left-hand corner. But as the tide is coming in, all of this white foam and everything is eventually going to fill in that area of the photograph. So I can get this thing set up, get the photograph going, and I don't have to wait, because patience isn't a virtue that I was born with. So we're 1 minute and 19 seconds into this. I can already see on the preview from when I first set up this photograph, the base of the posts that weren't covered with white foam before are now covered with white foam, which is great because that is the look that I was going for with this photograph. So do you know sometimes when you go out and you do a little bit of long exposure photography, you'll get home, you'll throw the images on the computer and you'll notice a lot of really overly bright coloured pixels all over the image. Well, those are called hot pixels. Now granted, they're not always a product of the long exposure. Sometimes pixels die on sensors. Not always are they products of long exposure, but a lot of the time they are. And that is when the sensor is getting a little bit warm because it's been exposed and all of the electricity is running through that sensor for an extended period of the time. And the sensor is getting quite warm, and that tends to be a byproduct of this. You get these hot pixels everywhere. But using this live comp, it will eliminate a lot of that because the sensor isn't always on. There is a split second between each exposure, and that just gives that sensor a little bit of time to cool off and ramp down that electricity running through it. And hopefully that will give you some cleaner looking images and less hot pixels to eliminate in Lightroom or Photoshop when you get home on the computer. And that's just another great little bonus of this mode on my Olympus E-M1 Mark II. So what then, if any, are the negatives and the drawbacks to doing long exposures using the live comp on this camera? Well, I've set up a composition now. We're staring right down the River Humber. There's some really nice backlighting going on in the clouds. It's quite a stormy day today and the clouds look really quite dramatic. So I thought we'll just throw something very simple, very backlit clouds and just do something a bit dramatic. So this first photograph I want to show you, everything was shot at 10 seconds. So every image that was laid and laid and laid was shot at 10 seconds. I put the camera down to f22 in order for me to do that with a 10-stop filter on. But take notice of the sky. Now, can you see in the clouds where there's all these little tearing patterns and everything? That is where, for a very split second, the camera shutter isn't taking a photograph, the sensor's not exposing everything, and it just leaves a slight gap in the long exposure, and I really, really don't like doing that. You will notice when I was down on the beach, I was taking photographs mostly of the waves and the water, where they're just swirling around in very random patterns. Well, with the wind, the clouds are all moving in one direction, so when the sensor's not exposing the photograph, you get a slight shear and a slight tear, where there's a very, very split second when nothing has been taken. Now, they were all shot at relatively fast shutter speeds for a long exposure of 1.3 seconds, so I've done something. I've now set the camera at f8, which is actually, f8's a little bit on the underexposed side now. Right, f6.3 is going to give me 1.3 seconds. Now I want to do the same thing, I want to take a 2-minute exposure, so let's set that going. So we'll take the base photograph, and now it's just going to layer and layer and layer all the highlights on top of it, and I want to see if using a faster shutter speed than 10 seconds makes any kind of difference to the photograph. I have a feeling it probably won't, but in the interest of fairness, let's just see. Ew, that was even worse, wasn't it? So I think note to self, if we're using this live comp for long exposures, longer exposures with clouds probably work better, but I would probably avoid clouds at all costs. So that leads me on to the next question. When on earth would you use this mode? I honestly think doing something like this is probably going to work quite well. So I found this on the beach. I quite like these around Spain Point. They make for great subjects for long exposures. But every time I do a long exposure, I throw one of these in the surf and everything, and it gets washed around and swirled around, and you spend 20 minutes trying to get it back in the position it was, and you never can. So I've had a plan. The tide's coming in. What if I get it just before the surf, get it aligned and set up, set the camera taking a photograph, and then as the tide reaches it, the highlights swirling around it at first should in fact give me the photograph that I want. So let's find out. It's a long way down there. Wish me luck. So here it is. It's just before the surf. Oh, it was. Oh dear. Oh, that's cold. But at least it didn't move. Right, so we've got this set up. Now, there are some tracks from where I dragged this down. They may end up in the photograph at first, but I'm not awfully worried about that. What I am worried about is that. This lot will wash the tracks away. You see where I'm going with this? Let's get the E-M1 set up and take a photograph of this thing. So the Olympus E-M1 is now set up taking this photograph, and as you can see there are no waves currently washing around it, but when I started it there was. So as the tide comes in, like now, all of the beach around this is now going to start getting washed over with white foam, which is going to add highlights to the photograph, and hopefully it's going to give me a lobster crab pot thing surrounded by white foam on a beach. Let's see what happens, and I'll show you the final photograph. So if you've seen the thumbnail to this video, you'll probably understand why I am ready to go home. It was a bit of fun and it seemed like a great idea at the time. So I hope today's video has given you an idea on how you can go out and use live comp yourself. I would imagine car light trails would look really, really impressive using this mode. In fact, you could probably go out during blue hour and do car light trails without any sort of ND filters, and I think you get some really good images of it. I'm not sure star trails would work with the aforementioned gaps in the clouds in the sky. I imagine you'll probably get the same kind of thing going on with the stars. But something with water, coast, waterfalls, lakes, things like that, I think would work really well with this live comp mode. So thank you for watching. If you did find it helpful and useful, please do give it a thumbs up. It does help the video and it brings new viewers to see my content. And if you liked it more than that, as usual, there is a subscribe button below me somewhere. I don't know what side, I can never remember. But you can press that and you'll see more nonsense from me and my Micro Four Thirds cameras every single week. So until the next time, I'm going to love you and leave you and say peace and goodbye. And I want to go home and get dried and changed. Great idea.